S-P-E-A-K. Everybody wanna sing. Speak up, S-P-E-A-K. Speak up.
In this issue of Speak Up, Future Shock special reading, Stuart Copeland after the police, Rowan Williams, a new archbishop, the English-speaking union, enough said, breakfast champions, eager eaters, after Iraq, the war on Bush, psychology, anger, management, country music, invading London, a short story by Donald Bartelm, and a song by the Dixie Chicks. Hi, and welcome to issue 193 of Speak Up. We begin on page 4.
Future Shock.
Capping cell phone worries. Norwegian scientists have come up with a much-awaited product, a baseball-style hat that shields cell phone users from radioactive emissions that might produce cancer. Called the Mobile Cap, this hat is now on sale in Norway for the equivalent of $53. Scientists claim that a metal tissue in these lightweight caps channels the radio waves away from the head while still allowing sound to be heard. A quick HIV test. Finally, an HIV test that will give results in just 20 minutes. Called OraQuick, this test works as follows. The patient's blood is placed in a vial of solution, together with a dipstick that develops a dark line when it is submerged. If the patient's blood contains HIV antibodies, the dipstick develops a second line. Though OraQuick detects antibodies that appear only 3 months after contamination, it certainly is a big improvement on previous laboratory tests that take weeks to evaluate. A scooter that skis. Thought two-wheel scooters were lots of fun? Well, then you haven't tried the latest 3-wheel version that will make you feel as if you're skiing on pavement. Called the Trike, this rockin' and rollin' aluminum scooter costs $300 and is already a big hit in Hollywood. To learn more, visit www.trike.com. Ebony and Ivory. An unusual new website that is actually a satire of the racial stereotypes faced by blacks in predominantly white environments is having an overwhelming response. In fact, www.blackpeopleloveus.com received more than 600,000 visitors in its first month, many of whom did not even realize its satiric nature. But its designers, a white brother and sister team, aren't concerned. They view their website as a form of social activism, a way to promote dialogue, to get people talking about these issues. Let it rain. Fans of cuddly Cashmere will go wild when they hear about this latest cool invention, Water Repellent Cashmere. A $1,100 windbreaker was introduced last spring that is coated with Teflon. This chemical treatment actually blocks the absorption of water, but does not alter the soft, luxurious texture of the material. For more information, visit www.lutzandpatmos.com.
Speak up.
A seminal rock band, the Police launched not only Sting but also Stuart Copeland. Speak Up pays a visit.
Stuart Copeland is one of the musical world's more interesting characters. Born the son of an archaeologist mother and a jazz-loving CIA agent father in Alexandria, Virginia, and not Alexandria, Egypt, as is usually stated in biographies, Copeland spent much of his childhood in the Middle East. He learnt to play several instruments, but settled on the drums, and at the dawn of the punk era, Copeland was now in England, he joined a group that was to become an international sensation, the Police. Since the Police split up in the 1980s, Copeland has built a second career as the composer of film scores, and his resume includes Wall Street, Rumblefish, and talk radio. He does, however, still play drums on weekends, and is involved in assorted projects, including Oysterhead and the reformed version of The Doors. I met with him in the Euro Tribu series of concerts. I began by asking him which instrument he used for composing his film scores.
I compose on a computer using MIDI, and what that is that with the computer, I can play the notes on a keyboard, and it enters it into the computer, and the computer understands what I did. And for a computer, music is very simple in terms of composing. For a computer, the information is only this note, C sharp, played here for that duration at this volume intensity. And that's all there is to it. That's really easy for a computer. So I can play anything into the computer, and it remembers what I did and can turn it into notation, and it'll play it back for me. And then I turn that into a score, which I put in front of the musicians and count them in.
It's intriguing that you've joined the reformed Doors. What prompted you to do that?
Well, I'm a big fan of the group. That was the seminal group when I was 16, and I pretty much the first tracks that I learned how to play and was inspired to play were the whole album, Strange Days. In fact, in the first Doors rehearsal, they started playing it, and I didn't need to rehearse. I already knew the songs. And it was pretty interesting how it all came back real suddenly. And I didn't really take it seriously because without Jim Morrison, it isn't. And with me on drums instead of John Densmore, it's not really the Doors. I didn't think it was anyway. But Ian Astbury of The Cult came on board as the singer. And they had these 2 shows booked, which we played. And the response was phenomenal. Not only from the audience, a large audience turning out, thousands of people, and also they screamed and shouted a lot, and as soon as every song would start, they're singing the lyrics, but I was excited, and I got a buzz from it, and I could see that Ray Manzarek and Robbie Krieger, the 2 original guys, they were getting a real buzz out of it too, because they hadn't played those songs in 30 years.
You discovered Sting playing jazz in a club in Newcastle, but what were you doing in Newcastle at the time?
I was playing in a group called Curved Air, and we had a night off, and a local journalist called Phil Sutcliffe said, "Oh, you got to come check out this local band. They're really great. They're really great." And I went and saw this local band. They're called Last Exit, and they were a jazz band. And I didn't think that much of them. I'm sure they were very good, but I'm not that big a fan of jazz. But the bass player had this shaft of light coming down from the heavens, lighting him up. And this just bass player, that is how you play the bass. And I just immediately connected with the way he played the bass, besides which he had just this charisma that was undeniable. And he can sing a bit, and that's all I needed, because this was at the end of the curve. Actually, no, it was few months later that the punk thing hit, and I could just sense that the punk thing, that's just the exciting world for me. This boring, old-fashioned, old-wave, long-haired hippie music was not really my thing. I was too young to be a baby boomer. I was kind of at the tail end of that whole hippie thing, and I'd missed the boat. I was just many years too late for that. But there was this new ship coming in, which I was ready to jump on. And so I wanted to form a group to play in these punk clubs and stuff. And I remember that there was that bass player who could sing a bit and who'd be a great frontman. That means that if the bass player can sing, that means that I could just get a guitarist and we're done. It never occurred to me that he could write songs. And it never occurred to me that he would go down in history as a great singer. He could sing pretty well, but I'm a drummer. He can sing. Primarily, I was interested in his bass playing.
Where did you find the guitarist?
Well, he found us. We met at a session where Sting and I were both hired to play for a guy called Mike Howlett, who was a member of a group called Gong, hired us to play a session to play on his album. So we played on his album. And the guitarist on that session was Andy Summers. Then we did a show with him in Paris, and he was short of material, so we played a couple Police songs. So Andy knew a couple Police songs. And then we got back to London, and we did a Police show with our original guitarist, Henry Padovani. And Andy came along to the gig, and since he knew a couple of the songs, he got up on stage and played a couple songs with us. And I didn't think that much of it. Next day, I happened to run into him on Oxford Street, and he said, "Stuart, come here, let's have a coffee." "Oh, great to see you." I think he ambushed me. He was lying in wait or something. And so we went and had a coffee. He said, "Stuart, you and Sting are really talented. You need me in the group. I accept." And so I said, Andy was one of the most expensive, highfalutin session players in town. Triple scale guy. Sting and I knew of him before we ever met him. And we were kind of like in awe of him at the session. He was just highly in demand as a very expensive session musician. And I'm trying to explain to him in this cafe on Oxford Street, "Andy, look, we don't have any, well, we do have management. You're looking at it. The record company, you're looking at it. The road crew, you're looking at it. I'm really honored. It would be incredible if you'd join this group, but you don't understand. We can't pay you. You're going to last 3 weeks. It's really great, but it's just not going to work out." Sting, I couldn't talk Sting out of it. Sting said, "Are you kidding? He's in. I'm going, look, it's not going to happen. He's going to join the group and quit after 3 weeks." Sting and Andy both persisted. "Okay, you can join the group, but I'm not firing Henry because I know that you're going to be out of here in a week. We can't afford you. Anyhow, long story short, Henry was out within 3 weeks, and Andy stuck with it.
So Andy was the star at the beginning.
Oh, yeah. Well, not so much the star as the big cheese. Sting was always the star.
Speak up.
From music to religion, Piers Grimley Evans meets Rowan Williams, who has raised more than a few eyebrows since being appointed Archbishop of Canterbury.
Rowan Williams, the new leader of the Anglican Church, has achieved a difficult feat since his appointment was announced in July. It is no longer easy for the Church of England to get the attention of the British, but by the end of 2002, his name was familiar to everyone who reads a newspaper. For the readers of the serious broadsheets, it was known through controversies on issues such as gay vicars, female bishops, and the morality of a war with Iraq. For readers of the popular tabloids or red tops, his name is recognised due to his initiation as a druid in a stone circle in August and his unexpected enthusiasm for The Simpsons. Rowan Williams recorded an exclusive interview for us before his enthronement as Archbishop of Canterbury. I asked him if Britain is, as many have described it, a godless society.
I'm not at all sure that Britain is a godless society, but I'm not sure the God British people believe in is always the same God as the one we talk about in church. People often show a great interest in the spiritual. People will often perform rituals and ceremonies which reflect religious or spiritual beliefs, but they're not so eager to make a commitment, a promise, to belong to the church or to feel themselves to be bound by the formulae that the church expresses its belief in. So I think there is some goodwill towards religious institutions in Britain. We haven't yet lost the sense that religious belief matters, but the church has a lot of work to do in communicating its own beliefs and formulae to those people who are interested but not quite convinced that the God they believe in is the same God as the church's God.
Archbishop Williams' role will also be international. The Church of England is a world church with branches in many countries. In recent years, Anglican missionaries have even come from Africa and India to reconvert the British to Christianity. He is well suited to his global responsibilities. He speaks 7 languages, including his native Welsh, and he has travelled widely. He was abroad in New York, 200 feet from the Twin Towers, on September the 11th, 2001. The experience had a deep effect and inspired a book. He told me how he saw the relationship between the Muslim and Christian worlds.
We have quite substantial Islamic communities living in this part of the world, and in recent years I've found that conversation with them has been very stimulating and generally very friendly and very constructive. Because Christians and Muslims have some shared history, they come from the same roots. They both look back to Abraham and some of the history of the Old Testament as part of their story. Then Christians and Muslims have something to say to each other. They're not just completely separate worlds. And I think we've begun to discover more and more how much we have to say to each other and how much we can learn from each other.
Liberal values and attitudes typify Rowan Williams' approach. They make it easy to classify him, as he describes himself, a hairy lefty. But although he has put himself on the left in several controversies, such as publicly declaring that a war with Iraq would not be a just war, he has won respect for following his own conscience and intellect rather than ideology. The idiosyncrasies of his approach, such as being inducted as a druid, which he described as one of the greatest honours which Wales can bestow on her citizens, have appealed to the British. None of these idiosyncrasies has won more sympathy than his public declaration that The Simpsons are one of the most subtle pieces of propaganda in the cause of sense, humility and virtue. He told me why he stood by this view.
One of the things I love most about The Simpsons is how very successfully it deflates different kinds of pretentiousness, different kinds of being pompous and unreal. It's always very hostile to people who are hypocritical. It exposes with great wit and imagination some of the stories we tell ourselves, some of the pictures of ourselves that we treasure. We're given a central character who is often having fantasies about himself and what he's capable of, but is always brought back to reality. And I think in that sense, it does teach humility. It teaches us to be aware of and to laugh at our pictures of ourselves. Also, in the huge majority of Simpsons episodes, goodness is taken seriously, not in a solemn or moralizing way, but the values of honesty and generosity and forgiveness and faithfulness are the ones which quite clearly this programme endorses. And I think it's quite remarkable that we should have such a hugely popular show which takes for granted these very solid virtues and values.
Teaching these moral lessons will not be an easy task. 100 years ago, England was already described as no longer a Christian country. More recently, in October, the declining prestige of Christianity was revealed when an award ceremony for prominent Christian sportsmen and celebrities had to be cancelled, as several of the nominees were concerned that being described as Christian could damage their careers. It remains to be seen whether or not it will listen, but the new Archbishop has already ensured that he will have an audience.
Speak up.
Next up, Justin Ratcliffe pays a visit to the English-speaking Union.
Speak Up went to Dartmouth House in London to talk to Valerie Mitchell, OBE, Director General of the English-speaking Union, and asked her why English is the language best suited to bring about world understanding and cooperation.
Should one travel internationally in all 5 continents, it is so clear that it is English that most people are wanting. But English is a mother tongue language. And as far as the English-speaking Union is concerned, it is really the non-native English side that we are supporting. But it is in helping these non-native English-speaking countries who need this language so much at the moment, and I could go into it, that English is the language of change, it's the language of renewal, it is the language of democracy, and it is the language of the pluralistic society. But there is no doubt that it is no longer our language alone. We do not own this language, it belongs to the world. And through the English-speaking Union, we believe that by supporting the English language as the working language of the global village, it has 2 unique attributes. One is that it enables young people to express themselves at international level through debating, public speaking, and at the same time it uniquely builds bridges between cultures. However, we would not like to feel that because somebody had a problem with pronunciation, and even in some cases incorrect grammar, that they were not going to be given the opportunity to communicate, because we feel that communication is the greatest way of fostering links amongst people, communication and education. And if you don't reach out to people in simple conversation and really try and understand what they're saying, one will never really bring together some form of world peace.
And now, in the words of Monty Python's Flying Circus, for something completely different. Piers Grimley Evans investigates a bizarre new sport, competitive eating.
There are not many sports where the new world champion acknowledges the cheers of his supporters with pieces of bread coming out of his nose and a stomach straining to hold 50 hot dogs. But even if you find the sight of Takaharu Kobayashi, the victor of the July the 4th hot dog contest, disturbing, he represents a sport that it is getting harder to ignore. George and Richard Shea, who run the International Federation of Competitive Eating, are confident their moment has come. This is a sport for every man, George Shea says, and believe me, we are the next big thing. He's still trying to convince the Olympic Games to give the sport official recognition, but it already has the stars. In America, these include heavyweight eaters like Hungry Charles Hardy, 163 kilograms, and Ed Cookie Jarvis, 181 kilograms. In Britain, the outstanding name is Peter Dowdeswell. He told me why he's known and feared by eaters around the world and how his remarkable career began.
I've got 303 world records for eating, drinking, you name it. I've got the world record for it, for hard-boiled eggs, raw eggs, mashed potatoes, grapes, pancakes. Drinking 90 pints of beer in 3 hours. Eating 5 pounds of live jelly eels, eating 12 champagne glasses in 5 minutes. I've been known as a medical freak. I started in 1974 and I've not been beaten in any competition at the moment. It was just by chance I had a yard of ale competition in the village where I live, and my friends pushed me in to have a go at it. I drank the yard of ale and then found out that I took 2 seconds off the world record. Well, since 1974, when I first started, it was a laugh. But since then, it's snowballed, and I've just raised just over £4.5 million for handicapped children now.
Competitive eating has a vast audience, which the Shea brothers are eager to increase. Peter Dowdeswell's formidable talents have taken him around the world many times. In America, broadcast events attract audiences of 7 million. But to attract the attention of TV networks, eating needs rules. To make the sport nicer to watch, the IFOCE, International Federation of Competitive Eating, has banned the Roman method, or vomiting, pioneered by Russell Mad Dog Mackover in 1999, and it frowns on farting. But there are also safety issues. Like many sports people, competitive eaters have to face pain. Peter Dowdeswell, whose records include eating 144 prunes in 34 seconds, accepts this.
You sit with some discomfort. You do sit with some discomfort on it.
He is, however, concerned about the element of real danger in American competitions.
I was invited into their hot dog competition over there. Well, the rules of the Guinness Book of Records for eating hot dogs is you get 4 minutes to eat as many as you can. There's specified jumbos, hot dogs, with the rolls and the sauces in them. You're allowed to use one hand only. And by the time the 4 minutes is up, your mouth must be empty. In America, they give you 20 minutes to eat. You can eat with both hands, you can dunk your rolls in water, you can do anything. And then just before the 20 minutes is up, you can ram 6 or 7 hot dogs in your mouth. And they still count that as you've ate them, but you've got them all in your mouth. They've not been consumed. And if anyone's going to choke, it's someone ramming 6 or 7 hot dogs in their mouth at one time. I feel it's very dangerous to do it in a quantity that they're trying to make you do it.
In the expanding calendar of eating events, an accident may be waiting to happen. The crucial July the 4th Coney Island hot dog contest, which has been running since 1916, is now part of a busy national circuit involving oysters, chicken wings, peppers, matzo balls and cannoli. Abroad, events include bratwurst in Germany, fish in Thailand, sushi in Japan and haggis in the UK. Risks also seem bound to rise. Competitive eating involves a lot of money, so the number and frequency of events seems destined to increase. Yet Peter Dowdeswell does not accept that the sight of men stuffing their faces is inherently disgusting. It is, he claims, a sport with real appeal.
Like when you see athletes, you hear them shout the last part of the race, but they're cheering all the way through the eating competition. As soon as they say go, you hear them start cheering, and they really get in with it. It's a sport everyone can understand, and it is a crowd puller. No matter where you go, it draws the crowd.
Competitive eaters, he adds, may not resemble other sportsmen in terms of their fitness, but for pure sportsmanship, they are unbeatable.
In eating, there is no jealousy. When I turn up at an event, everyone that hasn't seen me expects to see a big fat bloke turn up. And when I turn up all dressed up in my suits and that, they just don't believe it's me. But after it, all the other competitors that I've ever gone against have shaken my hand, said well done and everything. There's never any ill feeling against us. We're all friends afterwards.
Speak up.
It's well known that the majority of the population of Europe was opposed to a war in Iraq. But what about the United States? Well, the country did have a vociferous anti-war movement, even though it tended to find expression on the internet, rather than in the mainstream media. Senator Edward Kennedy and former President Jimmy Carter spoke out against the war, as did many musicians and actors, several of whom were subsequently attacked by the country's so-called hate radio stations. And although it has received almost no coverage in the news and so far has come to nothing, there is even a movement to impeach President Bush because of the war. Francis Boyle, who worked with Congressman Henry B. Gonzalez on a campaign to impeach Bush's father at the time of the last Gulf War, and who feels that fear of impeachment was actually what prevented him, George Sr., from invading Iraq, is the main advocate of this new impeachment initiative. Just before the Second Gulf War began, Speak Up called him at his office at the University of Illinois.
We have a committee here of 10 students, very bright, dedicated students, They are in the process and have been in the process of contacting every member of the United States Congress with my 6 proposed articles of impeachment to get it into their hands. And that is going on now as we speak. And we are attempting to get at least one member of Congress with the courage, integrity, and principles of the late, great Congressman Henry B. Gonzalez to put that bill of impeachment into the House of Representatives. And then everyone can rally behind that and indicate to Bush Jr. that he runs a good risk of impeachment. Bush Jr. lost the 2000 presidential election. Everyone in the United States knows that, and he stole it from the American people in Congress at the United States Supreme Court from 5 Republican-appointed justices in a completely disreputable, disingenuous, and sophistic opinion. He has no democratic mandate or legitimacy at all. And if we point out to him that he very well could be impeached if he goes to war, I think that will have an impact on him. If there's anything he desperately wants is to win that 2004 presidential election campaign and get some type of democratic legitimacy, which he doesn't have today.
Boyle then explained the procedure for impeachment, should the motion find a sponsor in Congress.
It gets introduced into the House, and then it gets referred to the House Judiciary Committee. And I think you've seen the process with respect to former President Clinton. In his case, these fascistic Federalist Society lawyers impeached President Clinton over oral sex. That's what it amounts to. And you saw the whole process there. Trivial compared to what's going on here. This is clearly a war of aggression, steal oil, committing outright genocide against the people of Iraq. So that's really what's going on here. And I remember when I was in college, Congressman Robert Drinan introduced a bill of impeachment against Nixon into the House. And everyone sort of scratched their heads at that, but eventually it came to pass, and there were hearings, and finally Nixon was forced to resign rather than be impeached and undoubtedly convicted. So that's our agenda here. Well, Article 1 of my impeachment resolution is addition to the 5 I did for Congressman Gonzalez, and that deals with clearly the establishment, their attempt to establish a police state here in the United States of America. I've been a practicing lawyer since 1977 and a law professor since 1978 and a human rights lawyer and an international lawyer. Clearly, they are doing everything humanly possible to set up a police state here in America. And that's why I put that right there in Article 1, to try to stop this. America is moving toward a police state. That's exactly what's going on here in America today as I speak.
But, as is well known, the position of the Bush administration is that the war in Iraq was an act of defense, rather than of aggression. This is what the president had to say in his last State of the Union address.
Today, the gravest danger in the war on terror, the gravest danger facing America and the world, is outlaw regimes that seek and possess nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. These regimes could use such weapons for blackmail, terror, and mass murder. They could also give or sell those weapons to terrorist allies who would use them without the least hesitation. This threat is new. America's duty is familiar. Throughout the 20th century, small groups of men seized control of great nations, built armies and arsenals, and set out to dominate the weak and intimidate the world. In each case, their ambitions of cruelty and murder had no limit. In each case, the ambitions of Hitlerism, militarism, and communism were defeated by the will of free peoples, by the strength of great alliances, and by the might of the United States of America. Now, in this century, the ideology of power and domination has appeared again and seeks to gain the ultimate weapons of terror. Once again, this nation and all our friends are all that stand between a world at peace and a world of chaos and constant alarm. Once again, we are called to defend the safety of our people and the hopes of all mankind, and we accept this responsibility. America is making a broad and determined effort to confront these dangers. We've called on the United Nations to fulfill its charter and stand by its demand that Iraq disarm. We are strongly supporting the International Atomic Energy Agency in its mission to track and control nuclear materials around the world. We are working with other governments to secure nuclear materials in the former Soviet Union and to strengthen global treaties banning the production and shipment of missile technologies and weapons of mass destruction. In all these efforts, however, America's purpose is more than to follow a process. It is to achieve a result, the end of terrible threats to the civilized world. All free nations have a stake in preventing sudden and catastrophic attacks. And we're asking them to join us, and many are doing so. Yet the course of this nation does not depend on the decisions of others. Whatever action is required, whenever action is necessary, I will defend the freedom and security of the American people.
One of the most vehement critics of this position is the novelist, essayist, occasional actor, and history buff Gore Vidal, who recently published the book Dreaming War: Blood for Oil and the Cheney-Bush Junta. The 76-year-old Vidal addressed an anti-war rally in Los Angeles on February 15th.
I belong to a minority that is now one of the smallest in this country, and with every day it grows smaller. I am a veteran of World War II. And I can recall thinking when I got out of the Army in 1946, well, that's that. We won. And those who come after us will never need do this again. Then came the two mad wars of imperial vanity, Korea and Vietnam. They were bitter for us, not to mention for the so-called enemy. Next, we were enrolled in a perpetual war against what seemed like the enemy of the month club. Remember Gaddafi, remember Noriega, all the drugs in the world, remember Bishop of Grenada, remember Bush Sr. standing tall in a Gulf somewhere. This long war has kept major revenues going to military procurement, secret police, while withholding money from us taxpayers with our petty concerns for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But no matter how corrupt our system became over the last century, and I lived through 3/4 of it, we still held on to the Constitution and, above all, to the Bill of Rights. I have been discouraged at times, like all of you, but I always felt that the Republic was upon such a firm foundation that no one could undermine it. I never once believed that I would ever see a day like this, when a great part of the nation, of we the people, should be obliged to march against an arbitrary and secret government preparing wars for us to fight in. It was Benjamin Franklin, that nice, witty, plump gentleman, who saw our future most clearly back in 1787, when he was a delegate to the Constitutional Convention at Philadelphia. He was old, he was dying, he was not well enough to speak, but he had prepared a text which a friend read. It is so dark a statement that most school histories omit his key words. Benjamin Franklin urged the convention to accept the Constitution despite all its faults. It might, he said, provide good government in the short term and may be a blessing to the people if well administered. And I believe he said that this is likely to be well administered for a course of years and only end in despotism, as other forms have done before it, when the people have so become corrupted as to need despotic government, being incapable of any other. Franklin's prophecy came true in December 2000. When the Supreme Court bulldozed its way through the Constitution in order to select as their president the loser in the presidential election of that year. Despotism is now securely in the saddle. The old republic is a shadow of itself, and we now stand in the glare of a nuclear world empire with a government that sees as its true enemy we the people, deprived of our electoral franchise. War is the usual aim of despots, and war is what we are going to get, unless with help from well-worshippers in new old Europe, and from ourselves, awake at last. We must persuade this peculiar administration that they are acting entirely on their own and against all of our common history. The other night on CNN, I brought the admirable Aaron Brown to a full stop. Not with Benjamin Franklin. I feel the history lesson coming on. But with President John Quincy Adams, who said in the 1820s, on the subject of our fighting to liberate Greece from Turkey, he said, "The United States goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. If the United States took up all foreign affairs, she might become the dictatress of the world, but she would no longer be the ruler of her own spirit." So let us regain our lost spirit, and should we be allowed in the year 2004 to hold a presidential election here in the homeland, we shall realize that the only regime change that need concern our regained spirit or soul is in Washington.
With the growing stress of urban life, losing your temper is increasingly common, especially at holiday time. Speak Up manages that. One of the ironies of holidays such as Christmas, Easter, and Thanksgiving is that they are also peak periods of discontent, misery, and violence. Mike Fisher's bread and butter. Fisher, the UK's leading anger consultant, is, as you might expect, a busy man. And right now he is highly annoyed. As he struggles with a water dispenser, he swears, and a visiting journalist makes an unsuccessful attempt to be funny. "That's no way to talk to a water dispenser. You should watch your temper." "Only joking," I add, as a dangerous look flashes in his eyes. The moment passes, but I had been lucky. Mike Fisher is a professional counselor. For the last 2 years, he has been successfully introducing Britain to the new therapy of anger management from an office in North London. Before that, however, he was extremely volatile.
The way I got into anger management was because I recognized that although I'd done at least 14 years of counseling and psychotherapy, and I've been practicing as a counselor and psychotherapist and group facilitator for the last 10 years, I still had a lot of anger, which I wasn't really dealing with. And part of the way I wasn't dealing with it was simply because for at least 40 years of my life, I have been stuffing my anger, i.e. I've been what you would call an imploder. So not really expressing my anger and not really letting other people see my anger. So I would implode and I'd put on this smiling face and be terribly polite and very nice. Meanwhile, I was fuming inside and all I wanted to do was to tear your throat out. In the last 5 years, I've had the privilege of moving from being an imploder to an exploder, where I had got to the point in my life where I wasn't really invested in what other people thought of me. And the consequence of that is that I became less afraid of being rejected and abandoned. And the consequence of that is that my anger started coming to the surface, but in a very extreme, dangerous, malicious way. And what I noticed is I started to express my anger in very abusive, verbally abusive and destructive ways.
Researching ways to control his own rage, Mike Fisher discovered anger management, which has existed in the USA for 20 years. A number of highly strung celebrities have used it, and it is recognized by doctors and the legal system. In Britain, Mike Fisher is a pioneer, but he believes that he has come not a moment too soon. Britain is sitting on the emotional equivalent of the San Andreas Fault.
Essentially, this is a passive-aggressive culture. It's an anal culture. We stuff our feelings. Americans is an oral culture. They eat a lot, they shit a lot, and they exaggerate a lot. It's a very open culture. We're a very closed culture. And from the perspective of anger, and when I talk about passive-aggressive anger, really what I'm talking about is, the thing about the English is you'll see them huffing and puffing and cussing under their voices, but they'll never say to you directly, "I'm angry with you." So there'll be a lot of animation and exaggerated behavior, which is an expression of anger, but they won't actually come out and say how angry they are. There's this incredible sickly politeness which drives most foreigners nuts. But the truth is that it exists. And the problem has been that over the last 5 or 10 years or 15 years. As I said earlier, an imploder will eventually explode. I think that's what's happening in this culture. People are finding that they can't contain their anger. So the way that anger is expressed in this country, in these passive-aggressive ways, cynicism, sarcasm, sabotage, and when I talk about sabotage, I'm talking about revenge cycles, and a simple revenge cycle will be arriving late at work, stealing the stationery, abusing the internet, and those are the kind of ways that you would see that manifesting in the workplace. In the home, it'll be not following instructions, undermining each other, sabotaging each other, and actually just generally hurting each other. So that's that passive-aggressive behavior that I'm talking about. It's much more apparent in this country. But, as I said, the imploder eventually explodes, and what we're seeing is, 5, 10, 15, 25 years of anger that's finally reaching the surface, like any volcano that takes time to erupt, naturally so.
Mike Fisher hopes to prevent the country descending into a mass of red-faced lunatics with steam coming out of their ears. Last November, he staged an Anger Awareness Week and distributed information packs for the coming holiday season. These told how to recognize and deal with your anger. However, as he readily concedes, Christmas is a kind of anger minefield.
Christmas is stressful because of the amount of pressure we put on ourselves to have a great time. It's perpetuated by the media, have a great time. It's perpetuated by our family and friends to have a great time. So I believe that I need to have a great time at Christmas. Now, the tragic thing about Christmas is that it's a period of introspection and reflection. It's the stillest and the most quiet time in nature. And yet what we're doing as humans, instead of trusting our nature and trusting nature, we do the exact opposite. We celebrate at one of the most darkest moments of the winter. So what you really have, in my opinion, is you have this polarity. You have where my unconscious, when my psyche, my soul, the person that I am, needs to reflect on the coming year. What I'm doing is I'm celebrating, intoxicating myself and having a great time, which is in juxtaposition and polarity to really spending a quiet time by myself or with my family or with my close friends, talking, communicating, sharing, reflecting, and dreaming.
I can sense Mike Fisher is eager to get back to dealing with the season's misanthropy. So, as a last question, I asked him how you can spot the typical English passive-aggressive type. His reply, given the unfortunate start to the interview, was not entirely reassuring.
The key way is someone who is sarcastic and cynical and uses humor distastefully. Because what they'll do is they'll say something insidious and hurtful and then turn around and say, but I was only joking. So that's what you got to watch out for. And that sideways, passive-aggressive, sarcastic remark is very undermining and painful to the other person.
Speak up.
The very American genre of country music seems to be conquering London. Speak Up reports.
In theory, the Arlenes should not exist. While jazz, blues and rock and roll spread from the United States to every corner of the globe, no one else has ever wanted country music. It could be the combination of guitar, banjo and violin. It could be the subject matter, sometimes parodied as, "My dog died, I'm going to jail and my truck won't start." Or it could be the puns, such as, "I'll oil wells love you," in a song about marriage to a Texas oil baron. Country just does not make sense outside of rural America. Yet the Arlenes do, in fact, exist. And they are based in Camden in North London, the spiritual home of Britpop, where they play pure country. Even more remarkably, critics agree that they're extremely good at it. To find out how and why, I visited Big Steve, the band's leader, and his American wife Stephanie Arlene, one of the band's singers, in the flat they share with their 4-month-old daughter in a North London suburb. Steve first told me that Europe's largest city is actually a very natural place to find the quintessentially rural American musical style.
London is probably, out of all the places in the world, where probably every country artist will pass, or every musical thing will pass, probably more than anywhere else in the world. In America you've got New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, Washington, all these huge places with huge metropolis, and it's their own little thing. Great Britain is actually quite a small thing, and London is definitely the hub. And everybody passes through London at some stage. Big orchestras from Russia or wherever, or Australia, or singer-songwriters from America will pass by, and consequently there's an awful lot of people that will only go and watch that particular style of music in set venues around London, and that's where we've played on that circuit. A lot of people believe that because Americans make country music, that's the start and finish. There's something integrally wrong with an English person making country music. They're starting to change their tune now.
The Arlenes are the leaders of a trend. London's concert-goers demonstrated their growing enthusiasm for country in November with Beyond Nashville, the second edition of a wildly popular festival of country musicians at venues across London. Since the film Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, record buyers have also been showing increased interest in the genre. This does not entirely explain the Arlenes, however. Big Steve started playing country music 15 years ago when it was about as fashionable as Acne. I asked Big Steve and his wife if they had chosen the emotional intensity of country because of their personal history. Both are the products of broken homes.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I think stuff like that informs everything that you do in your life, and it probably informs the music that I listen to as well. But yeah, I suppose so. I mean, I was a sensitive child, and that probably just drove me more into my own self and more into being sort of a person that shut myself up in my room and listened to music rather than going out and messing around with playing with people, my friends and stuff. It turns you into kind of an introspective child, I think.
Having come from broken families, who you can't help but feel that the breakup of the family is somehow to do with you, and there's all those sort of things, and the feeling of the fact that your father could actually just walk out and leave you is kind of really heartbreaking. I'm always kind of writing about things that have affected me in the past, and I think you need to have suffered a bit in that to kind of hit some of the chords sometimes. The saddest song or the saddest line that I can sing sometimes gives me the greatest pleasure.
This concern for emotion and sincerity is perhaps more typical of British country music than it is of the Nashville version. It is just one of the distinctive features of alternative country, also known as alt country or Americana. The audience is younger, more urban and more fashionable than that for conventional country. The Arlenes, British country's brightest stars, reflect this in their music. Big Steve writes songs about his own personal experience, growing up in London, and he doesn't write about pickup trucks and beer. He is, however, surprisingly attached to country's least loved elements, its cheesy lyrics, predictable tunes, and unrestrained kitsch.
Now that country is becoming popular in the UK, I'm going to have to think of something else to be into because I've always liked to stand out as doing something different to what everybody else is into. But I mean, I found country, and I'm a huge fan of country music. I love its kitschness. That's the finest part about it. I have written really straight country songs with that play on words and the kind of the catchy chorus that comes up that's very body country, but ultimately my band wheedles them out and says, actually no, Steve, don't go there. so I probably should finish off a really country album at some stage and go the full hog just to satisfy my country songwriting.
Speak up.
Our short story this month is A City of Churches by Donald Bartelm. It's read by Chuck Rolando.
Yes, Mr. Phillips said. Ours is a city of churches, all right. Cecilia nodded, following his pointing hand. Both sides of the street were solidly lined with churches, standing shoulder to shoulder in a variety of architectural styles. The Bethel Baptist stood next to the Holy Messiah Free Baptist, St. Paul's Episcopal, next to Grace Evangelical Covenant. Then came the First Christian Science, the Church of God, All Souls, Our Lady of Victory, the Society of Friends, the Assembly of God, and the Church of the Holy Apostles. The spires and steeples of the traditional buildings were jammed in next to the broad, imaginative flights of the contemporary designs. Everyone here takes a great interest in church matters, Mr. Phillips said. Will I fit in? Cecilia wondered. She had come to Prester to open a branch office of a car rental concern. I'm not especially religious, she said to Mr. Phillips, who was in the real estate business. Not now, he answered. Not yet, but we have many fine young people here. You'll get integrated into the community soon enough. The immediate problem is, where are you to live? Most people, he said,
live in the church of their choice. All of our churches have many extra rooms. I have a few belfry apartments that I can show you. What price range were you thinking of?" They turned a corner and were confronted with more churches. They passed St. Luke's, the Church of the Epiphany, All Saints Ukrainian Orthodox, St. Clement's, Fountain Baptist, Union Congregational, St. Anargyres, Temple Emmanuel, the First Church of Christ Reformed. The mouths of all the churches were gaping open. Inside, lights could be seen dimly. "I can go up to 110, Cecilia said. "Do you have any buildings here that are not churches?" "None," said Mr. Phillips. "Of course, many of our fine church structures also do double duty as something else." He indicated a handsome Georgian facade. "That one," he said, "houses the United Methodist and the Board of Education. The one next to it, which is the Antioch Pentecostal, has the barber shop." It was true. A red and white striped barber pole was attached inconspicuously to the front of the Antioch Pentecostal. "Do many people rent cars here?" Cecilia asked. "Or would they, if there was a handy place to rent them?" "Oh, I don't know," said Mr. Phillips. "Renting a car implies that you want to go somewhere. Most people are pretty content right here. We have a lot of activities. I don't think I'd pick the car rental business if I was just starting out in Prester. But you'll do fine." He showed her a small, extremely modern building with a severe brick, steel, and glass front. "That's St. Barnabas. Nice bunch of people over there. Wonderful spaghetti suppers." Cecilia could see a number of heads looking out of the windows, but when they saw that she was staring at them, the heads disappeared. "Do you think it's healthy for so many churches to be gathered together in one place?" she asked her guide. "It doesn't seem balanced, if you know what I mean." "We are famous for our churches," Mr. Phillips replied. "They are harmless. Here we are now." He opened a door, and they began climbing many flights of dusty stairs. At the end of the climb, they entered a good-sized room, square, with windows on all four sides. There was a bed, a table and two chairs, lamps, a rug. 4 very large brass bells hung in the exact center of the room. "What of you?" Mr. Phillips exclaimed. "Come here and look." "Do they actually ring these bells?" Cecilia asked. 3 times a day, Mr. Phillips said, smiling. "Morning, noon, and night. Of course, when they're rung, you have to be pretty quick at getting out of the way. You get hit in the head by one of these babies, and that's all she wrote." "God Almighty," said Cecilia involuntarily. Then she said, "Nobody lives in the Belfry apartments. That's why they're empty." "You think so?" Mr. Phillips said. "You can only rent them to new people in town," she said accusingly. "I wouldn't do that," Mr. Phillips said. "It would go against the spirit of Christian fellowship." "This town is a little creepy, you know that?" "That may be, but it's not for you to say, is it? I mean, you're new here. You should walk cautiously for a while. If you don't want an upper apartment, I have a basement over at Central Presbyterian. You'd have to share it. There are 2 women in there now." "I don't want to share," Cecilia said. "I want a place of my own." "Why?" the real estate man asked curiously. "For what purpose?" "Purpose?" asked Cecilia. "There is no particular purpose. I just want—" "That's not usual here. Most people live with other people. Husbands and wives, sons with their mothers. People have roommates. That's the usual pattern. Still, I prefer a place of my own." "It's very unusual." "Do you have any such places? Besides bell towers, I mean?" "I guess there are a few," Mr. Phillips said, with clear reluctance. "I can show you 1 or 2, I suppose." He paused for a moment. "It's just that we have different values, maybe from some of the surrounding communities," he explained. "We've been written up a lot. We had 4 minutes on the CBS Evening News one time, 3 or 4 years ago. A City of Churches, it was called. Yes, a place of my own is essential," Cecilia said, "if I am to survive here." "That's kind of a funny attitude to take," Mr. Phillips said. "What denomination are you?" Cecilia was silent. The truth was, she wasn't anything. "I said, what denomination are you?" Mr. Phillips repeated. "I can will my dreams," Cecilia said. "I can dream whatever I want. If I want to dream that I'm having a good time in Paris or some other city, all I have to do is go to sleep and I will dream that dream. I can dream whatever I want." What do you dream then, mostly? Mr. Phillips said, looking at her closely. Mostly sexual things, she said. She was not afraid of him. Prester is not that kind of town, Mr. Phillips said, looking away. The doors of the churches were opening on both sides of the street. Small groups of people came out and stood there, in front of the churches, gazing at Cecilia and Mr. Phillips. A young man stepped forward and shouted, "Everyone in this town already has a car! There is no one in this town who doesn't have a car." "Is that true?" Cecilia asked Mr. Phillips. "Yes," he said, "it's true. No one would rent a car here. Not in 100 years. "Then I won't stay," she said. "I'll go somewhere else." "You must stay," he said. "There is already a car rental office for you, in Mount Moriah Baptist, on the lobby floor. There is a counter and a telephone and a rack of car keys and a calendar." "I won't stay," she said, "not if there's not any sound business reason for staying." "We want you," said Mr. Phillips. "We want you standing behind the counter of the car rental agency during regular business hours. It will make the town complete." "I won't," she said, "not me." "You must. It's essential." "I'll dream," she said. "Things you won't like." "We are discontented," said Mr. Phillips. "Terribly, terribly discontented. Something is wrong." "I'll dream the secret," she said. "You'll be sorry." "We are like other towns, except that we are perfect," he said. "Our discontent can only be held in check by perfection. We need a car rental girl. Someone must stand behind that counter." "I'll dream the life you are most afraid of," Cecilia threatened. "You are ours," he said, gripping her arm. "Our car rental girl. Be nice. There is nothing you can do. Wait and see," Cecilia said.
We conclude this issue with a survey of the latest American slang. Chuck Rolando tells us how to be hip.
Keeping track of all the latest developments in slang is never easy, but there are kind people in this world who make their living from writing books on the subject. The latest offering is an amusing volume called The Hipster Handbook by Robert Lanham, which was published by Anchor Books in February. The hipster lifestyle may have begun with the Beat generation, but is still alive and well in the United States, particularly New York. Hipsters, the book explains, graduated from a liberal arts school whose football team hasn't won a game since the Reagan administration. They frequently use the term postmodern or POMO, and they tend to have one Republican friend whom they always describe as my one Republican friend. In order to help you, here is a glossary of terms which we shamelessly stole from the hipster website at www.hipsterhandbook.com. Here goes. Bronson, beer. Example, I drank a sixer of Bronson's last night while watching the game. Bust a Moby, to dance. Example, let's go to the tunnel and bust a Moby. Did you see her moves at the party last night? She really knows how to bust a Moby. Chipper, a woman who's easy. Example, she's a real chipper and will sleep with anyone after one Bronson. Clothesline, the gossip that is on the scene. Example, yo, I heard on the clothesline that she is sleeping with Billy. She is such a chipper. Cronkite, boy. Example, have you seen Anne's new Cronkite? She met him at the cafe and he is such a Fredo. Deck, a key word for most hipsters, similar in meaning to the antiquated fresh. To be deck is to be up on the latest trends, cutting edge, and or hip. Example, that tassel we met at the gallery opening sure looked deck in her cowboy boots. Have you checked out the new Jonathan Latham book? It's deck. Thin, the opposite of deck, similar to outdated terms like whack and lame. Something that is thin is bad or undesirable. Example, how can you like that Van Diesel movie? Every film he's ever starred in has been Finn. My date with Larry was so Finn. He took me to Applebee's and ordered cheese fries as an appetizer. Fredo, an ugly guy who thinks he's good looking. Example, Bill thinks all the girls love him, but they all know he's a Fredo. Jerry, a stoner or hippie. Example, my pits smell Ishtar. I feel like a total Jerry. Juicer, a ladies' man, an individual who has undeniable sex appeal. Example, I wish he would ask me out. He's such a juicer. Jug, a 40-ounce bottle of domestic beer. Example, tassels respect me. I can drink a whole jug and still bust a mean Moby. Kale, money. Example, yo, Kim, can you slide me some kale? I'm still waiting for my mom to send rent. Peace, cell phone. Example, John is such a nerd. He doesn't even have a piece. I must have been on the subway. My piece didn't ring. Tassel. Girl. Example, Jim is definitely a Fredo, but somehow he gets a new tassel every night.
Speak up.
Now we leave you with a special addition to the country music story. The Dixie Chicks singing Landslide.
That's all for now, folks. See you again next month.